producers were happy, financial institutions were happy, other carriers have followed suit, and the only thing I would say is that had there been reinsurance available before, we would have done it. We would have done it like that.
So reinsurance support was the key.
Yes. Great.
Freddie, since we're talking about the program that you created in Puerto Rico, can you talk a little bit about the exposures? I mean, we all know that not all floods are the same. There's different types of flood events. Talk a little bit about what you're insuring in Puerto Rico, how your product is designed, and then as a second item to that, can you talk a little bit about how you approach reinsurance in the program?
Well, I think the tropics is not easy. We are exposed to storm surge from hurricanes, excess precipitation from tropical systems, and a tsunami with the earthquake exposure. We are surrounded by 3 trenches in the island. 2 of them are very deep, and then we can fit Mount Everest, and you see the tip of it. So that's good news because of our Ring 3 deep oceans around us, it helps. Except for the West Coast, where we had our last big earthquake 98 years ago, which produced a tsunami. Obviously, the aggregate exposures out there were not near what they are today. But we have a frequency of earthquakes every day, obviously on very low on the Richter scale, but they're there. That's an exposure that's ever present. And almost to the day, today, 3 years ago, we did get 9 inches of rain at the airport, and we paid our share of losses. Since inception, our program is running at below 1% loss ratios. At the beginning, it was a quarter share, and once we grew our book to a very confident level, we then moved excess of loss. A couple of years ago, while we were visiting reinsurers on our renewal, which we used to do every year, some of the faces and some of the comments on reinsurers were, good luck with your program. The comments are now, bring it in, we want it, more of it. So the market has changed significantly. There's a lot of appetite.
I think all our clients would be happy to find a couple million premium at 1% loss ratio.
Less than that.
So thank you. Less than that. Put the rubber hat back on. Okay, so we talked about storm surge, talked about flash flood. We're here in Miami. There's a little bit of a different animal that they're dealing with here in Miami. The city of Miami has spent millions of dollars to install pumps to address nuisance flooding. They refer to it here locally as the king tides. John, from your perspective, how will the issue of sea surface rise and nuisance flooding in the future impact the direction of the flood market?
To me, what's happening around us every day really underscores the call to action. The king tide event in Miami, it's interesting, here we are in July at the lowest tide 6 months ago in January, when the king tide's at its absolute peak. What we're seeing is more people are affected by floods in different ways. And when you think about the model and the firepower needed to make the analytics possible to underwrite the risk, flood is an interesting cat. Think about flood as a catastrophe, earthquake, tropical cyclones. All of these are reflected by the structures that have to withstand the event. So we think about weather changes and how structures have to again stand up against these catastrophic events. Flood is unique. First of all, the footprint is many times larger. Second of all, flood is the only peril where our behavior influences the severity of where the event occurs. Agricultural practices, development uses, general land use practices influence, change floodplains and change where things happen. 40 years, 45 years, the federal government's been the only game in town. Many of you may not know this, but sometimes the federal government's slow to react. Rapidly changing times is not necessarily the best course of action. So a lot of intellectual firepower in this room. It's incumbent upon us. We want to make a difference in this space. We want to make flood a purchasable, consumable product for homeowners more than just those sitting in the mandatory zone. You need to think about these changing dynamics, things like the king tide, how the risk is constantly changing every day. If you don't do that, you're simply trying to underwrite what you knew yesterday, and you're going to fail.
Thank you. Talking about Miami being a ground zero for the king tide, and talking about peak zones. I mean, generally, Florida is considered a peak zone for wind, California peak zone for quake. Dan, do we have a perspective on what are the peak zones for the various types of flooding events?
That's a very good question. We do have to segment it in type of flooding. So, from a storm surge standpoint, really starting somewhere in the New Orleans, Biloxi area, all the way down to Lee County, Florida, Naples, Florida, the bathymetry is such that that is the peak zone for storm surge. That's where we'd expect to see tremendous coastal flooding. I think that's where, when we do talk to markets, that's the one area where reinsurance markets do want to understand how those risks are going to be underwritten and managed. River flood standpoint, fairly easy. You start thinking about the 1993 Mississippi flood. If you think about our greatest watershed in this country, it is Midwestern flood. The part that I think is most interesting, though, is when you talk about the flash flood. Freddie mentioned the 9 inches of rain. We saw 5 inches of rain yesterday in Rolla, Missouri. Flash flood is anywhere. It doesn't matter if you're X zone, it doesn't matter if you're A zone, it is anywhere, and it can happen throughout the year. We've seen it repeatedly in Texas over the last couple of years. We saw it in Columbia, South Carolina last year. So there are very few places in the United States that are not at risk due to flash flood. So I think that some of it has to do with the potential severity, 6 or 8 inches of water due to a rainfall event versus the velocity of a river flood breaking through a bank. But the risk is still there, so I do think it moves around it as far as the flash flood goes. But river flood, very well defined. Coastal surge, one of the high areas, very well defined. Flash flood, rainfall flood, anywhere.
So, Freddie, you went through this exercise in Puerto Rico where you evaluated all the different types of flood perils. You've obviously learned a lot of lessons over the last 4 years. Can you share with the group here, for people who might be interested in trying to identify private flood opportunities and then execute on those opportunities, what were the lessons learned there? And what steps would you take?
First thing, the FIP policy is the same for everybody. At the very beginning, we were dealing with aggregates and limited model output, and basically, the truth has changed. The truth has changed significantly. Happiness is partial, temporary, it's not permanent. What we've learned and what we hear today on all the models available, we would love to mimic, what we did back home in the States, in some fashion. There's 95 million prospects out there. We can always only eat the piece of the pie that would safely digest.